Today I'm going to discuss how I would go about custom quilting my latest quilt pattern called Padlock. I will have a link for that video down below in the description if you would also like to make this quilt. Now, as a quick little recap, I am using the program called Adobe Photoshop. Now, I've created an illustration design of the quilt top that I will be drawing on directly on top. Now, Photoshop is a monthly subscription service. If you do not use Photoshop on a daily, then I don't recommend necessarily going down this route. But what you can do is if you have an iPad, there is an app called Procreate, and you can create the same thing on the iPad. Now, what's also great about the iPad too is you can take a picture of your quilt and then draw directly on top of it. Now, you can do that, of course, in Photoshop, but that means I would have to take a picture, put it on my computer, then upload the image into Photoshop, and it's just a couple more steps, but it is doable as well. But I use Photoshop because basically the whole Adobe program suite system or catalog, I guess they call it now. I use a lot of their services for editing videos, also Illustrator quite often, and I already have Photoshop, so this is basically what I use since I do have it already. But anyways, let's go ahead and dive right in on how I would go about custom quilting my latest quilt pattern called Padlock. Now I'm going to zoom in just so we can get a closer look. And let's go ahead and start here at the top left-hand side, right here in this block. Now I am going to, of course, stitch in the ditch. Now, would I be stitching in the ditch exactly right now, the very first thing? Maybe, maybe not, but I'm just going to put that out there that no matter what, I will be stitching in the ditch. Now, I know some people are like, why do you stitch in the ditch? And it's honestly a personal preference. If you like to do it, then go ahead and do it. If you don't, then of course, don't do it. But I love the look of stitching in the ditch, especially with custom quilting. Now, whether I did the stitch in the ditch now or afterwards, what I'm going to do is in the dark navy section, I'm going to create that 1/4 inch echo all the way around. Now, what you can do is cut thread and then start your 1/4 inch echo, but if you are not a fan of cutting thread, then wherever you end up, say you're starting here in the beginning, you can just go at a diagonal and then start your 1/4 inch all the way around. If it's a 1/4 inch, I can promise you that you are not really going to notice that little diagonal line right here because, well, you'll notice it if you are looking for it, because then once you find it, then of course you will see it. But if you're not really looking for it, you won't notice it. Now, what I would recommend is once you make your way all the way around, don't start a new one because then you're just going to add to it, but leave from the one that you started if that's the direction you want to go. But once you go ahead and make your 1/4 inch echo all the way around, it's time to fill it in. Now you can use, we're going to go ahead and zoom in a little more. Now you can use whatever fill you like to do. Now I am a huge fan of the clamshells because honestly, I am still learning how to custom quilt. I've been longarm quilting for many years, but robotically and digitally. My previous longarm machines could not really custom quilt if I had the robotics on, which then again, I had it on all the time. So I wasn't able to practice my free motion skills. But now that I have a new longarm machine, which is a Bernina Q24, I can do both. So I am now just learning how to custom quilt, and clamshells is one of the very first things that I wouldn't say mastered, but I caught on semi quickly. They were one of the easier things for me to do, and I've kind of fell in love with them because it's the first thing I could really do. But if you are not a fan of the clamshells, then of course you can do rainbows. You could do pebbles, but this width right here is about 4 inches, and doing pebbles in 4 inches of space all the way around might be a bit of a headache. But if you do it, I would be very impressed because I would know that took so long for you to do. But either way, you're just going to go ahead and fill it in with whatever you like to do. You can do doodle quilting, not Google quilting. Doodle quilting, which you can make it all random all around. You can add flowers, feathers, rainbows, paisleys, basically anything. So I'm going to go ahead and fill all of this area in. And after your navy section is filled in, I'm going to scroll up a little bit because I'm going to repeat the same thing in this rectangle right here. So what I would do is, once again, either break thread, or I would travel. If I didn't break thread and I ended up over here on this corner, I would travel all the way across back down to where I did my diagonal. Then I would travel again, and then I would probably do a diagonal here then, and then my 1/4 inch all the way around. And then I'm going to fill it in with the same thing just to keep it symmetrical. If you've been following me for a little while, you'll know words sometimes stump me, and I can't pronounce them correctly. But yeah. So let me go ahead and fill all of this in for you all, just like so. Now let me zoom out just a little bit. Now I want to do something different in the yellow areas. And I'm thinking maybe let's do a feather because we did something a little modern and very packed in. So let's go ahead and do a feather. Now what we can do is we would end up back over here. So we can create a spine that just squiggles all the way around, comes in, and then maybe connects. And then we can go in and then fill with a feather, like so. Or if you don't want it to connect all the way around, what you can do is start here, squiggle and out, travel across the top, maybe do another squiggle down like so, come in, squiggle, go down. And you can make it random. And then we can go ahead and go back and fill it in with our feathers. Just like so. And let's go ahead and zoom out to get the better look. And there we have it. So there is one way we can do that. Now I actually just realized something. Because we rotate our blocks at a 90-degree angle from using every other block, we now kind of ran into a tiny problem. If we wanted to do an opposite design, so for instance, the navy is one thing, the yellow is another thing, I just realized that when we rotate it to the side, whatever is in this light gray would have to match one of those. So say it's the feather, then your yellow over here would be a clamshell, and then when you go to the next block, if you made this the clamshell and then this the feather down here, it might look a little strange. So this is a very good example of why I highly recommend you draw your quilts first and kind of jot down some ideas, because if I were to have quilt this and then realize that the next block over, I think I might have called it a day for quilting, because that means I would have to undo all of that, because I don't think I would particularly like it. But here's some other ideas what we can do. Let's go ahead and go to the next block over. I really do enjoy what I did in the navy, so we could take that same practice and do a 1/4 inch all the way around, like so, and then go ahead and fill it in, which I'll do rainbows this time, just like so. And then in the yellow section, we'll just go directly next door. Repeat the same thing. That way, when we rotate it at a 90-degree angle, you won't it won't necessarily matter what block is touching if it's the same thing. So once again, since I'm doing rainbows this time, I will continue on doing rainbows like so. And then of course we would have a stitch in the ditch because I prefer that. I like that look. Now, I have gotten a few questions in the past of why do I stitch in the ditch and then create a 1/4 inch echo and then fill it in. And honestly, that is because there is a custom longarm quilter on Instagram called like SEA, like the ocean, C Sheril Sew, all with S's, and I do have to say it very slowly, otherwise I will mess that up. I will have a link for her Instagram down below in the description, and this is her style of quilting. And yes, I am technically copying it, but she is amazing and I love her work so much. And honestly, when I grow up, I want to be just like her, but in my own way. And she does a stitch in the ditch and then a 1/4 inch echo. Now, she is not the only one that does this. There are, of course, a couple of other longarm quilters who have adapted this style of quilting within their custom quilting book of ideas. Let's just say, I don't know, I'm struggling with some of the words right now, but they're amazing. They're fantastic, and I've just really enjoyed the look. But the very first time I've seen this drawn and quilted out was with C. Sheril Sew, and her work is amazing once again. Now, because this is also a huge block, if you don't want to do the 1/4 inch, you can do a 1/2 inch. But I do prefer the look of a 1/4 inch. But if you want to do the 1/2 inch, go for it. It's your quilt. And because this is a large block, I think both could work either way. It's one of those that I would probably test out and do a little section a 1/2 inch away to see how much fill I could fill in, because I do want a good bit of fill happening personally, personal preference. And there we have it. So I went ahead and finished all of that in. And this block right here is 100% inspired by C. Sheril Sew. See, I have to say it very slowly. I almost stumbled there. But I really do like that, and I think that would look absolutely gorgeous, because then you can rotate it 90 degrees and it won't necessarily matter per se. But since we took inspiration from her, let's go ahead and think modern now as well. So what if we wanted to do something modern? So let's go ahead and scroll over. And once again, let's go ahead and stitch in the ditch to separate the design. And in this darker blue area, like this denim blue, let's go ahead and do vertical lines. Now, you can do every quarter inch, every half inch, and every inch. I probably wouldn't do lines bigger than an inch because it I'm not a big fan of unquilted space that large for personal preference. But you of course can do whatever you like. And then afterwards, oh, let's do this bottom half real quick. If you're not a fan of just straight line work, then you can go in and maybe fill it with something. For instance, if it's a half inch, you can do pebbles like so, continuing it. So since this bottom section left off without pebbles, then the first row will be pebbles in the next section. And you can go ahead and fill that in like so. And then in the lighter gray areas, let's do a diagonal line. Now, once again, this is a very large block. The finished quilt block size is 16 inches. So if you are quilting this on a Longarm machine, do keep in mind your throat space to see if you can go ahead and do ruler work, because it would be a pain in the butt if you had to quilt, let's say, to there and stop. I am not a fan of breaking thread right there or back traveling and then quilting and having to only go as far as I can. I like to complete the line per se, but just keep that in mind. I do have a larger throat spray, so I don't think this would necessarily matter, but I would test it out because when you usually add a ruler base to your Longarm machine, you end up losing some of your throat space too. Now, that also depends on what Longarm machine you have, but the ones I've used and have had the pleasure to play with, you tend to lose some inches when you add that ruler base. But go ahead and fill it in like so. Now, you might be thinking, well, we're going to have that same issue like we did in the beginning. Yes, but also no, because we got a couple more angles we can try. So in this dark navy blue section, we can now go vertical. And you can also play with the different types of densities, meaning every quarter inch, every half inch. So for instance, this navy or this medium blue shade, you could have done half inch. The diagonal, you could have done quarter inch. Maybe now we're going to do a 1 inch spacing because it's 4 inches across. So that would be 1 inches like so if you want to be accurate. Otherwise, it could be more dense, but you can play with the density here if you prefer. And then let's go ahead, stitch in the ditch while we're at it. And then in this other navy blue section, go ahead and do some more line work. And now that we had vertical, we had a 45 degree angle going downward to the left. Let's maybe go to the right. So we can go downwards to the right direction, just like so. And then just to continue on the pattern one more time, just so you can get a good example about it. You don't necessarily want another diagonal, even if you change directions and you go diagonal this way, it may look a little funny. So what you can do is go horizontal. And I'm just quickly doing this in, since we all know what drawing lines look like. And then once again, because you don't want the navy blue section to have lines going this direction because it would once again look funny, we can then do the vertical lines here. Just like so. So doing line work and just purely lines could also work out, and it can rotate 90-degree angles playfully. So that would look really great if you have a modern quilt. And if you don't want to fill in every other line with pebbles, if you do half inch, you can do those candy herringbones like so, all the way down to change it up, or you can do the serpentine S's if you prefer, which this is a little hard to draw, but just like little S's another way. And there's a couple different fillers that you can do in with your line work. Now let's go ahead and think well outside of the block, outside of the box per se. Now we're going to scroll down and come in the middle. And let's start right here in this square. Now, although we see this like purse lock shape, that's kind of what inspired me, like one of those like fancy luxury purses or those wallets that have that type of lock clasp. What you can do is then think outside of the box. Now, this is once again, it's 4 inches wide or across, however you want to see that. And right here in this section would make a perfect square. So let's keep that in mind. What you can do throughout the whole entire quilt and blanket it very well across is we're going to create a different shape. So we're going to create a secondary pattern. Okay. Now let me get another color real quick, because you're going to use chalk or some type of fabric marking tool that can either air erase, iron away with heat or water, something that you like to use. I prefer the chalk method at the moment, so I would be using chalk per se, but we are going to divide this block up. So we're going to draw some invisible lines that we'll be using, but we need these as a guide, and we're going to turn this into an 8-patch quilt, just like so. Now once again, this was all drawn with chalk. You will not be sewing these lines yet. Whatever I do in red will then become the sew line. Now this middle section, let's divide it in half again. So let's go ahead and divide this down like so, and also across. So now we kind of created another patch for 8-patch within an 8-patch. Now let's go ahead and go back to our long arm machine per se. Let's get the red back out. With our long arm machine, we are now going to stitch down. Let's go back up and then a 45-degree line. Now we're going to do another 45-degree line, back up, come down to the right, 45-degree line, 45-degree line. You might start seeing what we are creating. Come down, 45-degree line, 45-degree line, go up to the left, 45-degree line, 45-degree line. And now we've created a star. And I am a huge sucker for the star shapes. Now, what are we going to do about this? Next, we are going to cut thread, and we're going to repeat the same thing, but in this smaller section. So we'll start here. We'll go across, up, diagonal, diagonal, down, right, diagonal, diagonal, left, down, diagonal, diagonal, up, left, diagonal, and diagonal. And now we've created another star. But let's go ahead and fill it in. Since we ended up right here, I'm going to do really close zigzags up and down and fill it all in. Now you can of course do whatever fill. You can do your clamshells, rainbows, anything that you like to do. Pebbles. Go ahead and fill this all in. Just like so. Now We'll cut thread just for this example. In here, this would then become a 4-inch square plus these little points. And honestly, as a long arm quilter, that's too large of a quilt area unquilted. So I'm actually going to, let's lower this down so I can have a smaller brush, because I'm going to zoom in. And what I would do is, once again, either break thread, or if I ended up over here on this side, I would probably travel. Let's get a green color so you can see where I'm traveling. If I ended up in this section at the top left corner, I would then travel, maybe come down one of the lines I drew, and then make my way somewhere over here. Then I would go down at a 45-degree angle, and then getting our red, we are going to stitch a 1/4 inch away and echo our star that we drew. So we're going to go ahead and echo all the way around, just like so. And your star is going to look a lot better on the inside because you're going to be using your rulers. And now we're going to fill it in. Now you can do the same exact fill that you did in your larger star, but I highly recommend do something different. Now I did line work, so I want to do the opposite of a straight line, which means curves. So I would do something curvy in here. Now you can do a meander or swirls, so you don't have to do something too creative like clamshells, etc. Fill that all in, and we're going to pack that down. Then you'll make your way back out to the edge, because these corners here are once again very large, too large for me to go unquilted. So I would repeat the same thing that I did on the inner star, and let's go to the top left, and I would do a 1/4 inch and then fill all of this in. Then you can go ahead and do the flying geese, and here's something that you might start picturing now. Because we are using this block, if we were to basically copy and paste this block to the top, so let's go and get our bigger paintbrush out. This would be mirrored as the star. And then of course this would be all filled in, because this right here is the bottom of this star, but on the block above us. So then going back to our smaller paintbrush, you would 1/4 inch all the way around, and you would fill all of this in all together. So you kind of created a square on point. Same thing with your edges. You'll be a 1/4 inch over here, and you'll create a square like so. So this design would be perfect if you have a very small throat space on your long arm machine, because you can really divide it into sections. So let's go back to a bigger paintbrush, because we're going to pretend that here's some more points of our stars around the edges. I won't draw all of them, but for an example, all of these would be stars. And then you do your 1/4 inch all the way around, and then fill that in with something opposite, I would say. Just like so. And you can complete it all the way across. So now you've created this secondary quilt pattern within another pattern. Now for the diamond part, once again, this would be a star. Let's go ahead and do our 1/4 inch echo, and then fill it all in with something opposite. Just like so. Now you can of course do a 1/2 inch spacing just to make it a little larger and more defined. It may look a little bit better, since once again this is a very large quilt block, but that's something you'll have to play with down the line. Now that I am really loving, that would take a while to quilt out, but I think it would be really worth it, because I'm also a huge fan of stars. Now, if you do not like stars, I got a couple more ideas for you. Let's go ahead and scroll over. And once again, thinking outside of the box, we are going to create flying geese. So let's go back to our neon green, and we're going to use that same method of dividing our quilt blocks into an 8 patch. And I'm going to do the next block over as well, because this is going to go across all quilt blocks, just like so. Now let's go back to the red. Now, if you are a fan of flying geese, you can create a flying geese look across your whole entire quilt. And that is, let's go at a 45-degree angle, 45-degree angle. There's one flying geese. And 2. Then 3, 4. Then you can go ahead and come back and fill all of this in, just like so. Now, once again, this area might be a little too large for your liking as far as an unquilted area, so you can do a 1/2 inch or a 1/4 inch and just echo it. And you may only need to do this once or twice, so you don't necessarily need to fill in another dense quilting. But on the second row, let's do the opposite. So we went up in the first row first, so let's go down, then up, down, up, down, up, down, up, and fill it in on the opposite, just like so. And then of course I would probably stitch in the ditch on the bottom of your geese just to make it separated. And then you can go back and do a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch, whichever you prefer. And then on the next line, we would go across just to bottom out our flying geese, and then repeat the same thing from the top. So now we'll go back up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. Now this creates them like offset, so if you would like them offset, then go ahead and create it like so. And once again, you can fill it in with however you would like. Now you're probably thinking, what color thread would I use, especially if I'm using a bunch of different types of, let's say if you're doing like a rainbow quilt, what color would you choose then? And honestly, the best option would be an invisible thread. I know a lot of people do not like to quilt with invisible thread because it can be kind of tricky and a little bit of a pain in the butt. That personally would be the best option. Or you can do a gray or a light gray. Or if you want to go even more over the top, you can do thread changes on your colors. But that's, of course, you'll have to figure out and decide that. Now, if you don't like that pattern, what you can also do instead is, and let's go up, and in this block, say you do want the flying geese, but maybe let's create the flying geese going in this direction. And then we'll bottom that out. But we're going to keep them all matching. So then we're going to highlight and repeat the same row and fill it in. And maybe let's do horizontal lines. And there's that quilt. Now what you can do is your next block over, let's actually go over this way on top. You can then create the same thing, but maybe have your flying geese go upwards instead. And that way you can rotate it however you'd like. And it's not the same pattern just repeated all over across the entire quilt. And because we went left and we went up, let's go over. Now this side can go to the right. So this pattern can work great directional and just keep rotating and making your way around the block. Now I'll just fill in this one real quick so you can see, but I won't create the whole entire block again. But there's another idea. Now, if flying geese are not your thing, then you can still take this practice and create another shape. So let's go ahead and divide the sections again, and you can do a pinwheel. So we would want diagonal lines. Now all of this, go ahead and use your chalk so you can draw your lines, and then that way when you go back you can go ahead and fill in this section, then you can come up, then I would actually go across like so, and then you'd come back around. And basically you can treat this as like a bunch of half square triangles. So half square triangles have a ton of layout options. So you can create your secondary pattern using half square triangles throughout your quilt. And that is something that you can think outside of the box. You don't necessarily have to follow your actual quilt pattern's pattern, although that does look cool and it will help accentuate your design. But if you want to think, like I said, outside of the box, you can create a ton of more designs out of it. So there we have it. There are a couple of options, and I do hope you see one that you like with this quilt if you want to custom quilt it. Of course, it is your quilt. You can do whatever you like on it. And once again, I will have the links down below in the description for how to make my latest quilt pattern called Padlock, and to show you one of my favorite longarm quilters, see Sheril sew. Her link will be down below in the description as well. But until then, I will see you all next time.